All right, welcome to the Southern RAC tonight. Appreciate those that are joined with us and those watching. Before we start the meeting, let me read the electronic meeting notice, and then we'll go into the RAC introductions right after that. So I'm going to read this word for word. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the ability of the virus to spread from person to person, the governor has implemented a number of executive orders directed at controlling spread of the virus by minimizing face-to-face interactions. Public gatherings are strongly discouraged by the CDC, state of Utah, and local health departments since they facilitate face-to-face contact and pose an elevated risk for virus transmission. The Division of Wildlife Resources and the chair of this public body have determined that public gathering at Regional Advisory Council and Wildlife Board meetings presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who attend, and will conduct this meeting using a fully electronic format. This meeting format is authorized by recent amendment to the Utah Code and executive order by the Utah Governor Gary Herbert, and will be temporarily used in place of the in-person public meetings that usually occur around the state. Anyone wishing to comment on agenda topics in future meetings or to observe this meeting may do so by logging on to the division's web page at wildlife.utah.gov, where instructions and links are provided. So again, we've done this for several meetings now. Hopefully everyone's getting more accustomed to the process. Seems to be working fairly well, but we're all looking forward to the day to do this in person again, I believe. So I appreciate everyone being patient with this. Let's start the meeting. If we could just have the RAC members introduce themselves, and we'll start. I've got a list here in front of me. Let me just start with the list and go down it. Bart.
Bart Batista here, non-consumptive rep.
Gene.
Gene Boardman, representing public at large.
Riley.
Riley Roberts, sportsman.
Chad.
Chad Utley, public at large.
And Nick.
Nick Jorgensen, non-consumptive.
Sean.
Sean Kelly, Forest Service.
Verlin.
Verlin King, Agriculture.
Thanks, bro. Craig. So we dropped Craig. Hopefully he comes back on. Tammy.
Tammy Pearson, elected official.
And Dan.
Dan Fletcher, BLM.
Thanks, everyone. Hopefully Craig can get back on. We'll go ahead and get going on the agenda tonight. So the first thing we need to do is approve the agenda in minutes. So entertain a motion on that.
I'm here. I'll make a motion for that. I'm back. This is Craig Lobb.
Thank you. Craig made a motion to accept the minutes and agenda. Do we have a second?
This is Bart, I second.
Great, thanks. And we'll do a roll call on that. So again, just a reminder, when we go through the roll call, if you can just say yes or no. So Bart.
Yes.
Gene.
Yes.
Riley.
Yes.
Chad.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
Verlin.
Yes.
Craig.
Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
And Dan.
Yes.
Okay, appreciate that. The motion passes unanimously. Next item is the Wildlife Board Meeting update. So I'm going to just go through the motions and what happened at the board meeting. If anyone has any questions at the end, just ask any questions you may have. So the first motion was that there was a motion made to approve the minutes on the June 4th. Actually, I guess the motion to approve the agenda and minutes both passed unanimously. The next motion would be that they move to approve the fur bear and bobcat harvest recommendations for the 2021 as presented by the division. And that motion unanimously, sorry, couldn't figure out where that was on here. That passed unanimously. Next, there was a motion that they extend the limited entry season dates by 30 days on the Aquarius and Stansbury East Wasatch Mountains and West Strawberry units. That motion passed 5-1. There was another motion that they accept the remainder of the Cougar recommendations as presented by the division. And that was amended. The amended motion was to amend the motion to include the clarifying of the definition of kitten. The amended motion passed unanimously, as well as the original motion. The next motion was to table the recommendation. Okay, so the next proposal was a sensitive species recommendation. This didn't get heard in the RACs. It was the board that heard this, and there was a lot of discussion on this. If you were able to watch that meeting, maybe we could, if anyone has questions on it, we could talk about it a little more. But the board made a motion to table the recommendation until the October 1st Wildlife Board meeting and schedule an educational work session in the meantime. The work session was scheduled for September 16th, and that motion passed unanimously. The next item was the Expo permit audit, and there was a motion made to approve the Expo permit audit as presented. That passed unanimous. The next motion was to approve the Expo contract extension as presented, and that motion passed unanimous. The next motion was to approve the Expo permit list with the addition that all permits are available to both resident and non-resident for the length of the contract. And that motion passed unanimous. Just a little clarification on that. Historically, there have been some once in a lifetime permits that were for non-residents only, and they passed it. All permits will be available to both residents and non-residents going forward. The next motion was to ask the division to look at any new hunting technologies since the last update to the board and report on it. This is to be in place on the action log, and that motion passed unanimously. And then finally, that they approve the Expo permit rule amendments as presented, and that passed unanimously. There was a lot of agenda items at the last board meeting, but most of those dealt with the Expo. There's a lot of discussion on the Cougar. It was a good board meeting. If anyone, hopefully everyone had a chance to watch that or at least see some of the notes from that. The next item is a regional update, and I'll turn it over to Kevin for that.
Thank you, Braden. Let me get to the right spot here. From our wildlife section, some updates on youth pheasant hunt. So the statewide youth pheasant hunt will be October 31st through November 5th. And then we'll have some southern region specific youth pheasant hunts on the Pheasant and Annabella WMAs. And those will be the same. I don't have a date for those. I apologize. I'll look that up and get back to you. We are due to do Cwd collection in the southern region this year during our general rifle seasons on the Penguin Lake, Zion, Ponsagon, Pine Valley, and Southwest Desert Unit. We'll be holding check stations during the regular season and probably during the early rifle season to collect those. Hunters can also call the office and arrange to have lymph nodes tested or removed and then tested if they're interested. We've got some interesting things going on with wildlife. We've had an outbreak of rabbit hemorrhagic disease. It was detected again in Grover, and then we also had a positive test in Teasdale. And we're asking that anybody that finds sick or dead rabbits to please notify the division so that we can continue to test and find out the extent of that disease. Our deer plans our revisions are underway for our unit. We send out a survey specific to each unit in the southern region and got a really good response. The biologists are then taking that information and using it to write the deer plans. And then it will then again be vetted with what's essentially our surrogate for local committees because of our inability to meet in person. We will be doing a goat capture on the beaver unit in October. I will get specifics on that out to the RAC members if anybody wants to come up. That's usually a pretty interesting process to watch. From our aquatic section, we successfully treated Mammoth Creek up on top of the Cedar Mountain here. That treatment went really well to restore native cutthroat to that stream system. That'll be a 2-year process that we will continue next summer. And we're also looking at a treatment out at the Gandy Hot Springs. We're hoping to do that next week, but there's still some loose ends that we're just trying to make sure we've got everything in line for that. And then lastly, we held the drawing for the perch tournament for the tagged fish competition that began during the perch tournament last winter. And if either Phil or Richard wants to add something to that, I'd appreciate a little more detail.
Yeah, this is Phil. We normally have a drawing that we hold at Fish Lake this time of year, but we just kind of did that virtually today. Both Lodges and Bowery donated some prizes, and then Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife donated a gun, and we took all the tagged, those numbered tags from the whole summer, and just today we drew 9 or 10 prizes for people, ranging from overnight stays at the lodge and cabins, boat rentals, and then, like I said, a gun. There was a couple gift cards and stuff thrown in there. So big thanks to Bowery and Fish Lake Lodge, and also Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife for their contributions of the gun. Yeah, it was good.
Thanks, Phil. From our habitat section, they've been really busy trying to make sure that we were getting the correct rehab funding in place for all the fires that have taken place in the region. Those were all due last week, and I think we're in good shape to make sure that we're able to augment the rehab that the federal agencies will do on the fires that took place in the region. The horse gather that I mentioned at the last meeting took place out in the Southwest Desert. It was quite successful from what I understand. I do know that they removed 55 horses just from the Indian Peaks Wildlife Management Area. And then Dan or Tammy, do either of you have additional information that you can add on the horse gather?
I do. A total of 566 were removed. There's 183 studs, 256 mares, and 127 foals removed from that HMA.
Thanks, Dan. I think they had a goal of 600, and I think we got quite close to that. And Dan, I heard that they're going to continue to do some water traps and bait trapping to maybe get the additional 30 or so. Is that true?
There is potential for that, but honestly, it's not likely because we're going to move into the Frisco HMA later in September. That gather is going to start about third week of September, where we're planning on removing around 200 horses out of that HMA. So that wild horse team will go to that and work on that.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate the BLM's effort.
I think you're also going to treat and release 50 mares back, aren't you?
Yeah, back on sulfur.
And they turned 44 studs back.
Yeah, 44 or 45. That's correct.
Right. So they're supposed to do the treatment on Gonacon on the mares before they turn them back. So hopefully that'll keep them clear from having foals for a couple of years. And then
go ahead, Tammy.
I'm just going to say in Frisco, they're supposed to start, I think, the 21st, aren't you, Dan?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay.
Anyway, we appreciate the BLM in Utah has been much more aggressive at removing and keep and trying to manage wild horses than my understanding any place else in the West. And so we appreciate them taking that, making that effort. And a lot of that's been facilitated by the state being willing to partner and help add funding to make sure those horse captures happen. Moving on to our outreach section. So they've been doing some interesting things. It's hard for an outreach section to do much when they can't meet face to face with people. So they actually held a virtual mountain goat walk last week via Facebook. And I was going to ask Phil to just provide a little more information on what that was like and how many people you had participate and how it went.
Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, we just went up on the Tusher Mountains with biologist Mike Wardle. Those of you that know him, you all should know him. He did a really good job. We found a pretty good group of goats, about 40 or 50 goats. And we just had Mike kind of give some background and some biology on the mountain goats and during a Facebook live feed. And we had a spotting scope set up where we could just put the phone that was streaming live right onto the spotting scope and then allow people to kind of just watch and enjoy the goats for a few minutes, and had pretty good engagement. We had, while the live event was going, we had just a few hundred people watching, but since after it went live, then it just posts as a video onto Facebook, and we've had about 17 or 18,000 people view that after the fact. So kind of a cool event, highlighting a cool animal. I think it was pretty successful. While things are kind of strange with COVID, I think we may do a couple more of those for people. Seem to get a pretty good response. So
Thank you, Phil. It's nice that we have creative people that can do things like that. Moving on to our law enforcement, our new officers, Stetson West in Millard County and Julie Sabatis in Wayne County both seem to be doing well. I think our law enforcement and our AAS folks are really glad to see the last holiday weekend come and go, especially at Lake Powell. Just thousands, hundreds and thousands of boats, not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of boats coming on and off Lake Powell, keeping those guys extremely busy over the weekend. Things should start to calm down a little bit going forward, at least for our AIS staff at Lake Powell. Lots of recreators in addition to hunters out on the mountains, as it has been all summer. That combined with the hot weather has made success rates fairly low so far on the archery hunts. I think this cold snap that we're experiencing right now, hopefully that'll help hunters in the field, should kick some of the elk more into the rut and make them a little more vocal and a little easier to find. And then just an interesting case from our law enforcement that I wanted to give you just a brief sketch of. So we had some guys that were catching bass at Quail Creek, keeping them alive and then taking them down to bass fishing tournaments, several different bass fishing tournaments, but the one that we became aware of was down at Lake Powell. Through some use of some pretty cool technology using radioisotope analysis, we were able to prove that those fish had originated at Quail Creek and not at Lake Powell. And those two individuals have been successfully prosecuted at this point and will lose their fishing privileges as well as paying some fairly significant fines. So Paul, I think Paul Washburn's on. Anything you'd like to add to that, Paul?
Just that it was, as far as I know, the first time that this radioactive isotope testing has been used in a wildlife crime anywhere in the United States, and our investigative team did fantastic work in tracking down where to have scientists that can help with that technology and then be able to show that in court. And so
Paul, we're getting a lot of feedback, so I'm going to cut you off. Sorry about that. That's all I've got from the update. Is there any questions from the RAC members before I turn it back to Braden? Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that. We'll go into the first action item tonight. So the first action item is the fishing recommendations and fishing contest rules. As a reminder, everybody's had the chance to watch the presentations prior to this meeting. So during this meeting, we'll ask questions. We have the division personnel on and those that can answer any questions you may have. After questions, Kevin will give us the results of the information submitted from those presentations, and then we'll have an opportunity for comments and recommendations. So any questions on the first item, the fishing recommendations and fishing contest rules? And we'll just open it up for questions. Watching the other RACs, there was not a lot of questions or feedback. So instead of doing the roll call and taking the time to do that, we'll just open it up for questions. And if we don't have questions, we'll move on.
I had a quick question. On the spearfishing one, where you're gonna, and I'm not familiar with the lakes or reservoirs, either one, but I was just curious, what other areas are open to spearfishing?
Yeah, so I'm Randy Oplinger, so I'm the guy who did the presentation for the division. Statewide, I'm not sure. There's a pretty good list if you look at the fishing guidebook. I mean, there are definitely waters available for spearfishing, so we're not closing all of them. I think I looked at one point in time, I think somewhere around 5% of our waters that we have in the state that we stock fish into are eligible for spearfishing right now. So, we're talking 3 waters with various kind of closures or season end dates for them, and that's a pretty low percentage of what we actually allow statewide for spearfishing.
So I guess my next question would be, is there anything near that area that would still be open?
Which are you looking? We had 3 waters we talked about, and they're kind of in different parts of the state. I'm just bringing up the spearfishing list right now to get an idea. I mean, one's Fish Lake, which, I don't know, Richard, can you chime in on what else you have down your direction?
Yep. Fish Lake, we shortened the season for 5 days just to match it up with some kokanee regulations, just to make it easier, mainly for law enforcement. In that area, I mean, Lake Powell would be the next obvious place. I'm trying to remember some of the others that are open. I believe Otter Creek is open to spearfishing. Paiute is open to spearfishing. Some of those are very difficult. Fish Lake and Lake Powell are probably the most popular 2 spearfishing destinations we have.
Okay, just
Yeah,
my
and then,
curiosity.
Yeah, and I just did a quick list of, or scan of the list of waters in the state where we have spearfishing. We're talking about a permanent closure. I guess I shouldn't say permanent, but a year-round closure. For the time being at Ken's Lake, again, Lake Powell would probably be the closest option for that one. And then the other one is a seasonal closure on bass spearfishing at Red Fleet Reservoir, so up in the Vernal area. And there's a couple waters up in that area that still have spearfishing allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tammy. Any other questions?
This is Gene. I have a question on reduction of the wiper limit. What I'm really wondering is the purpose of the wipers for the fishing, or is it that they're supposed to be predators to clean up species that we don't want, or both, or what is the purpose for planting them in the first place?
Yeah, it's really twofold, and you hit on the 2 reasons why we stock wiper. So I mean, we do provide them in some waters as a sport fishing opportunity, and then there's other waters where they really are put for biological control of unwanted species.
Thanks, Gene. Any more questions?
I got one more, and I can't remember if it was on this presentation or the next one. They were talking about the state fisheries, and And I know there's been a lot of concern in the meetings and during the legislative session and that about the private fisheries or hatcheries being put out of business by the state. So I'm just wondering what I don't know if anybody could fill me in on that one way or the other.
Are you asking for what their opinions of the regulation changes, or just kind of a status update on private hatcheries here?
More of a status update. Yeah, just.
Yeah, I mean, where we kind of stand right now in private hatcheries in the States, I think they're holding their own and they're doing pretty well. We've had a pretty similar number of hatcheries statewide over the last few years. Down in your region, I think our private hatchery is doing pretty well. We've got a new warm water hatchery that showed up a couple years back, and it seems like his business is starting to really take hold, and he's doing pretty well down his direction. And then we've got another hatchery down in the Newcastle area that actually produces a lot of wiper for the state. So we buy them from him to stock into a lot of our waters, and it seems like he's doing pretty well as well. Beyond that, we've got a couple trout hatcheries kind of up in the Salt Lake area. It seems like they're doing fairly well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy. Additional questions? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin so he can give us the public input on this first item.
Well, the public input on this one and all of them for tonight are exactly the same. We had one member of the public that commented, and that person was in favor, so we're 100% in support and 0% opposed, based on a sample size of 1.
It sounds like a pretty biased. Sounds like a fairly biased statistical data there. Thank you, Kevin. So now we'll just have comments from the RAC. Any comments? And again, we'll just open this up instead of doing a roll call.
I'd like to comment. I was really impressed with the presentation. Well covered and seemed to be well put together, and everything squared around. I was interested in the fact that there's an effort to make a trophy bluegill fishery. I just wasn't aware that anybody fished for trophy bluegills. I guess it's because I've never seen any tacked to the wall at Sportsman's Warehouse or Cabela's or anywhere. But that was an interesting thing. I am where you're putting a limit on size. I'd just like to state that I'm not much for limits on size, and I'm not much for slots, especially for bait fishing. I think that cutting leaders and leaving hooks in fish isn't a good idea, and ripping their guts out isn't a good idea, and that it causes some mortality to have those slots where you have to turn them back if you're bait fishing. That's my comment.
Thanks, Gene. Other comments? You know, I think I'd make a comment here. I had the opportunity to be on a working group on the beaver fisheries over the winter. And I am not much of a fisherman. I enjoy it, but I don't know what I'm doing. And it was very eye-opening, one, to see how much interest there is in the state in fishing and how And then really impressed with the division and the personnel at the division and their knowledge of it and the attempts that they take to listen to the public input and to try to change the fisheries to match public input. It was a really eye-opening experience for me. So I guess my comment is I just am very impressed with what the division does to try to adapt and bring the fishing opportunities in line with what the public would want in the state. It was pretty impressive experience. Not sure I contributed a whole lot, but it was good to be there. So thank you. I think you guys really do a great job on the fishing.
Yeah, thanks. We appreciate that comment.
Any other comments from the RAC?
I would second Gene's comments. It was straightforward, easy to understand, and well prepared, and appreciate that.
Thanks, Nick. Additional comments? If there are no additional comments, we'd entertain a motion.
I'd motion to approve the proposal.
Thanks, Chad. So we have a motion from Chad to approve the recommendation.
I'll second that.
Thanks. Nick seconds that. Any additional discussion? All right, let's do a roll call to see if the motion carries. Bart?
Yes.
Gene?
Yes.
Riley?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
And Dan?
Yes.
Thanks. The motion passes unanimously to accept the recommendation as presented. The next two items are informational. So we'll go through each of these, but just for clarification, this is your chance to ask questions or make comments, but we will not do a motion on either of these. So the next item on the agenda is Angler Opportunity Assessment Update. So we'll open it up. This was presented by Craig Walker, and we'll open this up for questions first, and then we'll do any comments if there are any comments. So any questions on this one?
This is Craig. I don't know a lot about fishing, but I just, in some of the comments and what I read on Flaming Gorge there with Wyoming, where Utah pays to fish in Wyoming side, but Wyoming doesn't pay to fish in Utah side. I just want a little explanation there, I guess.
Yeah, so this is probably the sixth year that we've been working with Wyoming to try and do what we consider to be a reciprocal agreement with them. Their wildlife board is not in favor of pursuing a reciprocal agreement that is analogous to what we see down at Lake Powell or up at Bear Lake, where one state's license gets you access to either state's portion of the fishery. So we have this reciprocal stamp situation still existing at Flaming Gorge Reservoir. Right now, Utah residents are required to pay $30 for a reciprocal stamp to fish on the Wyoming side of the reservoir, and Wyoming residents are required to pay $10 to fish on the Utah side of the reservoir. Those reciprocal stamps are not eligible for people who are not residents of Utah or Wyoming. And that was a change that happened back in 2019 after Wyoming reread the rule. And again, their wildlife board decided that politically, this was not something that they could do, that it needed to be limited to residents of either of the two states. So what we're trying to do is, again, press for that situation where we have something that's more like what we see at Lake Powell. And hopefully we'll get there. In the interim period, we've had some calls for us to up the ante and potentially increase our reciprocal stamp costs. In my mind, I'd caution against that. We're not in the business of trying to price people out of fishing opportunities, and getting into a price war would probably put us into that position where we would put the burden back on the angler more so than punishing Wyoming in any way, shape, or form. We've had conversations with Wyoming as to why the reciprocal stamp is important for them. They indicated to us that it does provide them with $150,000 in revenue annually when they looked at that price point. Additionally, when you look at the actual price points for both the resident license and the reciprocal stamp, we're actually probably pretty comparable, plus or minus $5 for the total cost to fish at the reservoir.
Okay. Well, I just appreciate it. I just saw that in the comments and had wondering about it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
How long is the reciprocal stamp good for?
365 days, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
What's the split on the reservoir itself? Is most of the fishing done on the Wyoming side or on the Utah side? Is there ample on either side? Is there much many violations of crossing over on the reservoir?
There's not a lot in the way of violations that we've documented in the conversations we had. One of the things we've talked about with regard to reciprocity is not only the price point, but getting all of our regulations related to bag limits in line. I don't think we're ever going to get there on a 2-day possession limit, which we have in Utah, and Wyoming is adamant that they don't want to pursue that. However, actually, the numbers in the bag limit or creel limit is what we're shooting for, and having those be the same across the board. Even without the violations being documented, it still provides us with a way, again, to make it easier to understand by our anglers, regardless of what side of the line they're on. They don't fear that they're going to be in violation. And I think the perception that they could be in violation is what we're trying to avoid. Not the actual violations and that type of thing. Did that answer your question?
Partially. What about the reservoir itself? How much of it on the Utah side? How much of it on the Wyoming side? What's
as far as the aerial extent, how much of the reservoir is within Wyoming versus within Utah?
Yeah, and the fishing opportunity on each side.
I would say the fishing opportunities for smallmouth bass are greater in the Utah area, based upon the kind of demise that has been seen in the smallmouth bass population within the Wyoming portion of the reservoir due to burbot coming in. Aside from that, I would say that the other portions of the fishery, kokanee, lake trout, are pretty equitable between the two sides of the reservoir in both states. As far as the aerial extent, I would hazard a guess, and I'm kind of ballparking here, but I would say about 85% of the reservoir is located in Wyoming.
And I'll quickly chime in here. I was just looking at the last krill survey that was done on Flaming Gorge a couple of years back. Let's get to one of your other questions, the amount of use on both sides of the reservoir. It kind of looks like it's about 80% Wyoming, about 20% Utah, something in that range.
So it's proportional to the extent of the reservoir.
Good questions. Any additional questions? Right, let's move on to comments. Does anyone have any comments on this one? And again, this is an informational one, so we won't move into a motion if there's any additional comments.
I was just going to say, we got that one email from I can't think who it was, SFW, wondering if the RAC would possibly write a letter in support of the division, the state office in this matter. I don't know if there'd be any interest from anybody else or not.
Craig,
Just,
I know where
yeah,
this is a question, Craig, but do you see that? Is that necessary, or is this something that I guess I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that request.
Sure. I think that after the two RACs that we've been through, the central region and northern region, on the discussions we've had there, the sentiment was that the RACs were in support of getting on board with a letter, but that letter would come from the Wildlife Board itself, so that the RAC would recommend that the Wildlife Board would write a letter to Wyoming Game and Fish and the Fish Commission up there, and that anybody who was supportive of that letter among the RAC members, all 5 RACs, could be a signatory on the letter. I think that's how it was couched, if I remember correctly.
So where this is an informational agenda item, how is that done in the other RACs? Did they actually make a motion that they would support that, or was it just discussion? How was that handled?
You're 50-50. The central region actually made a motion. The northern region did not feel that they needed to make a motion.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any additional comments from the RAC?
Yes, on this informational item, they talked about limited entry fishing. The limited entry hunting is screwed up enough. I don't think we want any limited entry fishing. I just don't see where there's any need for it in Utah to make a area where only certain people on a draw can fish it. And I hope that goes away quickly.
So you're telling me, Gene, you don't want to see your points for catfish and striper and your trophy bluegill. Is that what you're saying?
Especially not the trophy bluegill.
Thanks, Gene. Good comment. Any other comments? If there's no additional comments, we'll move on to the next informational item. So the next informational item was the Middle Provo River update. So again, we'll start with questions there. Does anyone have any questions on that one? Any comments from the RAC?
I would just comment that I thought the presentation was really interesting and informative and well done. Applaud the division on the management of the Provo River. It's nice to see some quality artificial lure, catch and release type areas in the state. And I know there'd been a lot of concern that the catch and release on the river was creating smaller fish. And it was really interesting to see that report. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad. Any additional comments? All right, let's move on to the last item, the last action item. So the next item on the agenda is the rule amendments, deployed military rule amendment, and this was presented by Lindy, I hope I'm saying that right, Varney. Any questions on this one? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
I didn't have any questions. I guess where there were any questions, my comment was, I'm glad to see this happen. I wish it happened sooner, and I really appreciate the way it was put together.
Thanks, Nick. Before going into comments, let me just remind that the public feedback on this one was 100% in favor. That's 100% of one. So I don't think I need to turn it over to Kevin for this. We'll just recap that. Oh, Kevin does have a comment here. I'll give it to Kevin.
I will say that one, sorry, Braden and I are trying to share a room here. That one comment was 1,000% more than the Southeastern region had because they had 0.
That could be 100%, 1,000%, or 1,000,000%, however we want to term that. All right. Thanks. Comments on this one, additional comments on this item, the rule amendment for deployed military.
I like the proposal. You ready for a motion?
I think so. It's fairly quiet, so I'm assuming there's not too many comments. There were no questions, so I think we could entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the proposed amendment.
So Tammy's made a motion Tammy's made a motion to approve as presented.
I
There you
second.
And Bart has seconded that. Any additional discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call. Bart,
Yes.
Gene,
Yes.
Riley,
Yes.
Chad,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Verlin,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
Tammy,
Yes.
and Dan.
Yes.
All right, the motion passes unanimously. Appreciate it, everybody. That's the end of the meeting tonight. Appreciate everyone joining, and again, seems like we're getting more and more adept at this format. Hopefully this format doesn't continue for too much longer, but appreciate everyone's efforts and appreciate the division, your efforts here. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Braden.
Oh,
Thank you.
next RAC meeting will be November 17th, correct? 5 p.m. So that's after November 12th, so maybe COVID will magically disappear.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Let's
everyone.
try and have this meeting, if possible, in person. So it's a big important meeting, and